Hey guys, Danny Stone here, and today I'm going to show you how to make a moody flower like this one that I made for a recent Valentine's Day post. So today we'll make something like this, and once it's made it's super straightforward to come in and change the look and feel. You can really get a lot of different looks from shaded to gradients once you get the technique down. So let's jump straight in. So let's make a new comp. Let's make it square 1080 by 1080, 12 frames a second. Duration can be 10 seconds, that's fine. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come here, we're going to get a circle and make a shape layer that's a perfect circle at the center of the comp. We'll call this petal. And we'll also call this main comp petal. If we come down here to the shape layer, we can add a wiggle paths. So let's just tweak the settings here. We'll make it smooth. Let's drop the detail down to say 1.5 and let's bump the size up to something like 200. We don't want it to be moving, we just want it to be static, so we'll make the wiggles per second 0. I'll turn the correlation down to 0 as well. And now we've just got a simple shape. If we come over here to ShadeThrower 1.1, which you can get from the website that's on your screen now, let's add some noise shading. Collapse it here. We can come up to the settings and let's play around a bit. What we want to do is we want to make it look like there's a bit of an edge around the shading. So there's a new feature in ShadeThrower called Edge Offset and Edge Softness. So we can play with the Edge Offset. That's going to bump the shading inwards. About there is good. And then we can make the softness, say 20. It's going to blur the edges. And let's play with some of the other settings here. So let's come down to contrast. Let's turn that way down. We don't want it to be as crushed. And we can push the distance out a little bit, maybe 100. And then let's bump the softness up to say 200. Something like that looks good. We can also drop the noise amount, say 50%, so there's actually not as much noise. We can drop the noise size down to 2, make it a bit finer, and then just for now, let's turn the frame rate to 0 so it's not going to be moving at all. The angle is pretty good, but if you want to change the lighting direction, you could come up here and push that around. Okay, now the last thing we want to do is we want to come up here to Window and go to Essential Graphics, and make sure we're in this petal comp here. And under our wiggle paths, we'll come down to random seed, and if we right click on that, we can add the property to the essential graphics. And this is going to be allow us to change the shape of the path in another comp, which is what we're going to do now. So let's grab that petal, we'll drop it into a new comp. We'll call this one Flower Core. So we're in a new comp, we've got our single petal. Let's rename it to 1. And if we toggle this down and come to the essential properties, we've got the random seed. So we can start generating new shapes, still using that base comp. And these are going to be all our different petals. But what we want to do is we want to add an expression to this so we don't have to do it manually. So if we option click on the stopwatch, we're going to type seed random, and then we're going to type this layer dot name, comma true, enter, and then random 0, 10,000. And so what this is basically saying is this is going to be the random seed. Every time we duplicate the layer, it's going to generate a new number, and it's going to generate a new number between 0 and 10,000. Now the true in this expression is saying that we want that number to be the same the whole time of this comp. If this was false, it would give us a new number on every single frame, which is not what we want. We want it to be persistent, so we make that true. And the reason we're using this layer dot name is we want the seed to be the name of the layer, so that every time we duplicate the layer, it'll generate a new seed and will always stay persistent based on the layer name. So let's start duplicating. And now what we're going to do is we're going to start arraying these petals around in a flower shape. And this is really up to you now, how you kind of set this up. But it's about creating like a nice shape and pattern, depending on how dense you want your flower to be. And this is just going to be the core shape. So you don't want to add too many petals, you don't want to scale them differently, you just want to kind of array them in a circular kind of pattern. But I think that's good enough for now. What we're going to do next is we're going to animate this flower, and again you can do this in a numerous amount of ways, but we want to make sure that the anchor point for each of these petals is roughly at the center point of the comp on the edge of the petal. So that's where we're going to scale it from. So we'll just solo each of these petals at a time. There's not that many to do. Let's go to the first one and we'll set a scale keyframe with option S. Let's move that, say 10 frames down the timeline, and at the start we'll make it 0. And then let's copy paste this keyframe another 2 times. So we've got 100, 100. On this first one, we want it, when it scales up, to go a little bit bigger, so let's make it 104. And then when it comes back, we want it to go a little bit smaller, maybe halfway, so let's go 98. and then it's going to finish on 100. Let's set these to easy ease. On this first keyframe, let's hop over to the graph editor. I'm in the speed graph at the moment, and let's on this first point just add some easing, say about 80%, so there's a nice slope there. Let's wash that back. And now what we can do is we can grab those keyframes and just copy paste them to the rest of the layers. So now they're all scaling up at once. So what I want to do now is I want to offset each of these petals by about a frame from the top one, so that the top one comes out first. And maybe we can do these 2 at a time. I'm just using option page up and page down. Let's see how that looks. You could mix up the timing a little bit just so they're not so uniform. Yeah, it's pretty nice. That'll do for now. And the last thing we want to do in this comp is we want to add a drop shadow to each of these petals. So let's come here and add a drop shadow. We'll make the opacity 100, push the distance out a bit, increase the softness quite a bit, and we can copy paste that drop shadow to all the petals underneath. Maybe this first one goes a bit further. And don't worry about these edges, we'll deal with those a bit later. Okay, so this is going to be our flower core, happy with that. Now let's grab this flower core, let's put it into one more comp. This is going to be our main flower. And let's duplicate this layer. This is going to be our top copy. We'll scale it down to about there. Yep, that's good. Let's scale it down one more time. We can play with the rotations of these just a little bit to mix it up. Okay, and then the same thing as what we did before. We want to take these bottom copies and offset them a frame. Okay, now let's take this small one. We'll put it underneath the middle one. And let's just move it up here to add a bit more detail. We'll duplicate it again, and we're just going to shift it to the edges here as you see fit. And that just adds a little bit more detail to that flower. Okay, and let's just make these 4 another color just so we can see what we're doing. Now, if we play that back, you can see that these 4 are starting way too early. So what we want to do is we want to push them to about here so that they're not coming up until the flower on top covers them. And there, they come out towards the end now. And you can duplicate that flower again, even if you want to make it even smaller, so there's a really tiny copy in the middle there. Now let's deal with these shadows. What we're going to do is we're going to add an adjustment layer, and on that adjustment layer let's add a levels effect. And we'll come here and change it to alpha, and we want to crush and choke that alpha, so we're going to take the bottom point and drag it all the way up. And you can see here that number's changing, so let's actually make that 254. You can see now there's no alpha on the edges of that comp. But what we should do is we should add that drop shadow that we added to each of these petals. We should copy that and we should put it back onto these top copies as well, just to get a bit more shadowing. One other thing we can do is we can come back to our flower core layer. We can come to the rotation and add a wiggle expression, say 1 time a second and 3 pixels. We can copy paste that. Right click, copy expression only, and then paste it to the other petals. And now we'll have some movement on our petals. And the powerful thing is that if we come back to our original petal, we can change the color up till this point and it'll update automatically. We can obviously change anything we want of the shading effects that we added originally. We can turn the noise off completely. So it's a really clean, smooth gradient there. Or we can take a gradient. It's just a 4-color gradient. We can put that on top. And if we go back here, it'll update and it'll be a completely different look to the shaded look. And obviously on these ones, you want to turn off the drop shadows on both comps, so there's smooth shading. And there's a bunch of other things you could do to this. You could add some turbulent displacement or a ripple or a wave effect to give the overall flower a bit more life. And depending on what you're doing with it, when you're comping it with a scene, you can add a lot more effects to it. But this is just a really cool way to make a base shape like this. It doesn't have to be a flower, it could be anything really. And you have that control over the original shape. You could change the size or the detail of this, this wiggle path up to the last minute if you wanted. You can make it quite crazy. But yeah, I thought I'd share that with you guys, and I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and see you next time.